Okay, so this is our book for this half term. It wasn't our book, but it is now. This is our emergency book because some of you are at home. They're not, they're here. But I'll kind of involve you both. So I'm going to read a bit of Dracula. We're going to do some work about Dracula. You're going to do some work about Dracula. If you've already done the work because you got excited and did it early, don't worry. Here comes the first chapter. And if you're in here, here comes the first chapter. So this is Dracula by Bram Stoker. We're not reading the Bram Stoker version because it's quite complicated to read. So we've got like a simplified version for teenagers really. And you're nearly teenagers, so I think it'll work. Here we go. Chapter 1. Castle Dracula. It was the dead of night. Jonathan Harker sat bolt upright in bed and screamed, "No!" His brow was covered in sweat, his heart beat furiously. He was so scared he didn't know where he was. Then slowly, it all came back to him. He was at an inn in Transylvania, one of the wildest, least known parts of Europe. What a creepy dream, he thought. Those horrible wolves and that huge bat which wrapped its wings around me. He shuddered. Next morning he received a letter. My dear friend, welcome to Transylvania. I am particularly looking forward to meeting you in the flesh. I have arranged for you to travel by the afternoon stagecoach to the Borgo Pass, where my carriage will bring you to my castle, Count Dracula. As Jonathan was getting ready to leave the inn, the landlady surprised him by coming to his room and pleading desperately with him not to go. But it's my job as a lawyer, he explained, feeling slightly embarrassed. I've organised all the legal details of the Count's new house in London, and I need to explain him how to go. Oh, please don't be upset. Tonight, whispered the old lady, all the evil in the world will be let loose. You will be at the mercy of forces you never dreamed existed. You must not go. Oh, did you have nightmares as well? Jonathan joked, trying to make light of the situation. I did. First, this gigantic bat wrapped its slimy wings round me. Then, as I screamed in terror, it sank its teeth into... Are you all right? The old lady was moaning and gasping in horror, making him regret being so flippant. So when she held out her hand, the chain with a cross on it, he looked at her solemnly. For the sake of your soul, she begged, always wear this crucifix. I will, he said in a quiet voice. When the other passengers on the stagecoach found out where Jonathan was going, they stared at him in astonishment. Then they started whispering in Transylvanian, and Jonathan heard some words that he knew, Pokol and Vrolok. The first word meant hell, and the second, Jonathan shivered. It meant vampire. But he told himself that such fears were merely absurd superstitions. When he met the Count, it would be interesting to discuss them. Even though the roads were rough, winding and dangerous, the driver seemed to be in a frantic hurry. Jonathan watched the countryside flash past, a landscape of steep hills, green forests, and sudden spectacular views of craggy mountains. When it started to get dark, the driver urged his horses to go even faster, and the stagecoach swayed and rocked like a boat on a stormy sea. They entered the Borgo Pass at a full gallop. Then the driver pulled hard on the reins, and the carriage lurched to a halt. Jonathan was glad they had arrived. The other passengers were starting to get on his nerves. Half the time they were whispering that his soul was in eternal peril, and the rest of the time they kept trying to press cloves of garlic into his hand. Why? Thought Jonathan, as he secretly dropped yet another clove out of the window. This is the Borgo Pass, but there's no carriage waiting for you, said the driver with a great sigh of relief. You're not expected after all. It was a cold night, but there were beads of sweat on his face. We'll drive on as fast as we can, and you can return tomorrow, with a different driver too. he added in a low voice. But before he finished speaking, his horses began to snort and stamp wildly, and out of the surrounding darkness, a 4-horse carriage thundered up to them. When they saw the tall, dark driver, the other passengers screamed and cowered. His face was obscured by a long brown beard and a large black hat, but nothing could obscure the fact that his eyes flashed red in the blackness of the night. "The stagecoach has never been so early," he observed, smiling from a cruel-looking mouth, his voice harsh and malevolent. "Now," he commanded, "the English gentleman will come with me." Jonathan's fellow passengers suddenly seemed like the most cheerful, friendly and fascinating bunch of people he had ever met. There was nothing he wanted less than to leave them and go with the tall, dark man. But he felt that he had no choice, so he got out of the stagecoach and collected his luggage from the roof. His anxiety was not eased when the door of the carriage flew open of its own accord, trembling on its hinges. And when he got in, the door slammed shut behind him so hard that the noise echoed across the mountains like nails being banged into a coffin. Then, before he could even sit down, the carriage surged forward and swept him away into the night. The journey took hours. They rose ever higher up the perilous paths of the thickly forested mountains, the driver savagely cracking his whip as the horses struggled to climb the steep slopes. Bats flitted above them in great numbers, and by the edge of the road there were hundreds of wooden crosses, which, Jonathan suddenly realised with horror, were graves. Everything was so creepy that he wished he had stayed in England. He thought about his fiancée, Mina. She would be at home now, marking her pupils' homework, or perhaps sitting snugly in front of a log fire, eating hot buttered toast. Then, finally, the trip drew to a close. They journeyed along a track to a vast, forbidding castle, as wolves bayed malevolently into the darkness of the night. When they arrived, and Jonathan was left alone in the courtyard, he could see the castle's broken battlements etched against a moonlit sky. Not a ray of light came from the high black windows. Directly in front of him was a huge wooden door, and beyond it he heard heavy steps approaching. Clump, clump, clump. There was a rattling of chains and a clanking of bolts. Then, very slowly, the old door creaked open. Okay, part of chapter 1 of Dracula. We're going to do some questions about it and have a little chat. You've got some questions at home on Dojo to do about it. You've also got the text, so if you want to read Dracula again, that's great. Have a read, do the questions. I will send out the answers later on today. Tomorrow you'll get the next part of Dracula uploaded. You'll also get some more work to do, some questions and some writing based on the text. You'll be in tomorrow. That'll be much easier for you. So we will say goodbye to the people online. Bye! Bye! And we'll be in touch soon. Cheers.